This episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany is brought to you with support by New York State United Teachers, which represents more than 600,000 educators and school-related professionals in New York. If you're interested in how your business or interest group can support Dispatches from Planet Albany, contact David.Lombardo at WCNY.org. And if you're interested in personally supporting the show, visit capitalpressroom.org/donate.
I've also declared war on potholes, so here's the first shot across the bow.
Well, as you know, with Planet Albany, there's always something that makes the planet turn.
And it's this amazing view of D.C., and Eddie Vedder comes out. And he goes, "You have a cigarette?" And I've never smoked in my life, but if I had, I wish that was the moment.
And this strategy takes us from potholes to knotholes.
I would like to say it was a pleasure, Mr. Kim. But I'm on the road.
A commanding victory in New York City's Democratic mayoral primary this summer by Assemblymember Zohran Mamdani, a Democratic Socialist from Queens, has raised questions about the state of the Democratic Party, the future influence of the DSA in the Big Apple as well as across the state, and how the energy generated by Mamdani can be leveraged in the future to advance the DSA agenda. So on this week's episode of Dispatches from Planet Albany, we're going to discuss those topics and more with New York City DSA co-chair Grace Mauser, and we're also joined by Assemblymember Pharra Soufrant Forrest, a DSA member out of Brooklyn. Well, before we get into the future, I want to talk about how we got to this point, and specifically the DSA's role in helping one of their members become the Democratic nominee for mayor of New York City. In the case of India Walton's mayoral primary victory in Buffalo, she's talked about how the DSA initially was looking to kind of launch its own independent canvassing and fundraising operation, but instead funneled its volunteers through her campaign. So, Grace, I'm curious, what did the New York City DSA support look like for the Mamdani campaign, which I think had your endorsement even before he had formally launched?
Yes, we were proud to be the first organization that that endorsed him before he launched even. Our support for him had many different aspects to it. There was, of course, a large field component. This was integrated almost entirely with the campaign infrastructure. And the reason we were able to do this with a lot of trust and collaboration is because many of the staff that Zoran hired, not only in field, but particularly in field, were DSA members. In fact, Zoran's field director, Tasha Van Auken, is one of the architects, really, of New York City DSA's electoral strategy and definitely of our approach to field. So there was really never any hesitation to build, in collaboration with the campaign. And we developed this model over time. Early on in our modern iteration back in 2017, we also attempted a parallel model where we supported Hadar al-Yatim and Jabari Bridgeport during his city council race, and had more of a parallel operation. But we discovered that that didn't work for us. We didn't think it made the campaign as powerful as possible. And it also didn't give us, as members, the holistic skill set we needed to be able to run future races. So in 2018, with Julia Salazar, we had a more integrated model. It allowed us to build skills across the board, and helped build successful campaigns like Assemblymember Forrest, and really enabled us to scale up in the way that we did over time to the level of winning a whole mayoral race.
And Assemblymember, what was your process like of getting behind the Mamdani campaign? Because I have to imagine as a DSA member, you would be supportive of him, but maybe as a lawmaker, you've got different calculations, and maybe you entered this with more trepidation because of that role as an elected official. Because not all of the state elected DSA members jumped initially at the chance of backing the Mamdani campaign.
If it was as an elected official, I would be very scared to support Zohran. But it never was about me as an elected official. It's always been me supporting someone who has the same ideology, that has the same agenda that my constituents supported me to become assembly member. So, I know that other elected officials, when they are considering endorsements, they look at win numbers, they look at strategies, they look at, oh, what's it in for me? No, it's always been about the message. So when Zohran said he was going to run for office, I was like, wait, Z, are they ready? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, okay, let's go. There was never a conversation about what's this, that, win numbers. No, it was always about the message. So elected as an elected official, that would be my concern, but it never was.
Well, Grace, that sort of back and forth that the assembly member just highlighted seemed to be on display when thinking about Assemblymember Emily Gallagher and her reluctance to at least initially endorse Zohran Mamdani. And I'm curious whether there was any strife with the campaign once you had backed him and sort of decisions about messaging or policy, or was it kumbaya from start to finish?
So we've gotten this question a couple times, and I think it illustrates the uniqueness of how DSA operates. We are a truly democratic organization, and our elected officials, like Farah and like Emily, and the other 11 socialists in office we have, are also members. We know that having a real democratic process and having a forum has risk to it. There's no way to close it off from press. There's no way to keep it secret. The elected officials know that as well. So for us, it was almost funny how the reporting on some disagreement was presented as kind of this crisis, when in reality it was like, oh yeah, well, we don't all agree. It's some of us were more optimistic about the chances of winning, some of us were more scared of the risks of losing and what that could do to the movement, and that was aired out. Ideally, it was a private space, but obviously it wasn't entirely. So it wasn't kumbaya, but it never is in a truly democratic organization. It's about working through disagreements, organizing through them. And by the end of the campaign, I think not only were all of our elected officials on the same page, but the entirety of the organization was moving with so much commitment and so much energy in the same direction.
Grace is being so nice. She's being so nice about it because, David, it is difficult. And that's the role, I guess that would be my role as an elected official, to literally help other elected officials that are within our cadre, but then outside of our cadre, understand that this is not World War III. This is the same issues that pop up in our in our different constituencies. So my job really was to say, hi person, you're great, you're wonderful. There's something great happening over here. Jump on. Or at least if you're not going to be joining us, please shut your mouth. But then on the other hand, even with our more closer colleagues, really, really working out the kinks, taking time and talking. There's a lot of talking that happens. And so, Grace is saying there's no kumbaya, but sometimes we have to, arm wrestle somebody in, but it's okay because we all love each other and it's going to work out great. And obviously, the results of the race showed that it was great.
So, Grace, this spring I saw a reference to the size of the DSA in New York City, and that you'd reported growing by about 1,200 members over about 6 month period in the wake of Zoran's endorsement. Where do things stand with that now? Did you continue to grow since the spring, and where do things stand in terms of the number of New York City Democratic Socialists?
We've grown a huge amount. As of this past weekend, actually, we now have over 10,000 members in New York City DSA. It was actually an incredible moment. We had a big party, a volunteer appreciation party for the many people who have volunteered for Zohran's campaign. And at that party, Zohran came and he personally recruited the 10,000th member. At the start of the party, we were about 13 people away from 10,000. So it was just a beautiful and in many ways poetic moment. So we have continued to see growth. We grew a lot with the announcement of the campaign, and also, honestly, in the wake of Trump being elected, that those happened around the same time. But just in the last month, really since Zohran's victory, I'd have to check the exact numbers, but we've gained well over 1,000 members just in the last few weeks here, and we're the largest that this chapter has ever been, and we just see a lot more growth potential as we head towards the general election.
Well, as you head to the general election, how do you plan on leveraging those 10,000 bodies, Grace?
We're taking the general election very seriously.
As you probably should.
Yeah, yeah. You referenced India Walton. We definitely don't want to see something like that happen. Luckily, right now it doesn't seem like it's going to, but we're a front runner, but we want to take it seriously. And we also want to use the general election as a launch point for fighting for the Zohran's platform, fighting for affordability, fighting for legislation that needs to happen both at the city and state level to make the things that New Yorkers deserve possible. That means taxing the rich. That means thinking seriously about universal child care. It means protecting the state against Trump's ICE forces with bills like New York for All. So the general election is not only a chance to reach more people, reach more voters who are gonna, more voters pay attention to a general than to a primary, but it's also a chance to activate those voters, those supporters around the fights that really need to happen to implement the agenda we want.
Need help keeping track of the legislative session? Wish you had an extra set of eyes at the Capitol? New York State Watch does all of that and much more. Discover New York State premier legislative intelligence service by visiting nystatewatch.net or contacting Shane King at statewatch.com to learn more. So, Assemblymember, in terms of implementing aspects of the agenda that need to go through Albany, you just wrapped up your fifth session. What is the way that the DSA could be most helpful to Assemblymember Mamdani, potentially Mayor Mamdani's agenda that needs to go through the Capitol here?
The first thing is we need to make sure the state passes legislation that will openly support the mayor and the city council to render a city that's more affordable. And so right now, I just introduced a bill to allow New York City and the city council to authorize 2% tax increases on the millionaires and billionaires.
So how do you get that across the finish line, though, in Albany? I mean, right now, I think if that came up for a vote, well, it wouldn't come up for a vote because, as you and I both know, the Speaker and the Senate Majority Leader wouldn't probably bring that bill up for a vote. So how do you leverage, say, the 10,000 DSA members and any sort of growing support there is for Assemblymember Mamdani's campaign to get bills like that through Albany? What is the additional support that they can provide? How can they be effective or helpful?
Well, I think a lot of the New York City members in the legislature, both in the Senate and the Assembly, have a lot of say when it comes down to how what bills, especially their city and their constituents. I mean, if you look across the board, there's a lot of constituents across New York City that said that they want this. So their senators and their assembly members should listen to them. And then, working with our Tax the Rich coalition, multiple, including DSA, we will make sure that each and every assembly member and senate coming from the city understands that this is what the mayor ran on, and it was pretty clear and convincing in the primaries and will be clear and convincing in the general that this is what they want. And so 2% on millionaires and billionaires, That's what New York City wants, and that's what they're going to get.
You sound very confident, Assemblymember, but I don't know what that's rooted in, given the fact that the Tax the Rich campaign was successful at the end of the Cuomo administration, but that was a very different landscape than what we could be looking at in 2026. So why are you so confident about the agenda's ability to move in Albany, especially considering something like taxing the rich does not have universal support amongst New York City Democrats?
Yes. So, David, our shared constituency across the 5 boroughs have said over and over again through polls and now through a Democratic primary
Mm-hmm.
that they support raising taxes on the rich.
How do you translate that into moving all of these members who might be hesitant? How do you get David Weprin? How do you get Ed Braunstein? How do you get Andrew Hevesy on board with this? And that's what I'm curious about, whether it's taxing the rich or other housing policies, transportation policies. How do you translate what might be support in a poll into support by these lawmakers?
As an organizer, I can tell you that there is a lot more support than you think. I think that there are a lot of members who do care about their constituencies and that now can have an opportunity to show up for the communities that they serve.
Grace, do you plan on having a larger presence in Albany for the New York City DSA in 2026 and beyond, assuming there is a New York City Mayor Mamdani?
Yes, I mean, we've had a consistent presence there, and we have a template too for passing big bills that initially it seemed like there's a lot of opposition to, right? In 2021, we did pass increased taxes on the wealthy, and then in 2023, we passed the Build Public Renewables Act.
Perhaps a version
So
of it got included in the state budget.
it's part of the legislative process.
Sure,
You craft bills knowing that you're not going to get 100% of everything that's in the legislation.
like the key mandate
Um,
in that bill.
I still think it was a very significant step forward
Mhm.
in expanding NYPA's
Oh,
authority
definitely.
and in expanding what the state has the ability to do directly, right? Which is part of the socialist vision, right? Government can and should be doing things for people. But yeah, we plan to have a very significant presence in Albany this next session and building on this mandate that Pharra was talking about. I mean, yes, we know we're not naive, right? We know that there are a lot of legislators, particularly upstate, but some downstate too, who are more conservative, more moderate, not interested in taxing the rich. But we're also in a moment where a socialist has won mayor of New York, a fascist who has cut 10 billion from New York State's budget is in charge of our federal government, and many Democrats who maybe didn't have much of an interest or stomach for these fights before are now more interested in doing so because not only have the political winds in the state changed, but they have a moral imperative to fight Trump at a federal level and do what they can. And their constituents are more interested in that than ever before. And I think we're seeing some of that even with let's say, a touchier subject like immigration, where recent polling shows that more moderates, even more Republicans, are not supportive of just deporting tons of Americans, tons of people who are here. And so I'm hoping that these changes, the overstepping, the authoritarian gestures of the Trump administration, combined with Zohran's win, have changed the political landscape enough for the organizers like New York City DSA, like Pharra, to come in and push a little bit further and make these things actually a reality.
Grace, in terms of executing your vision for Albany and convincing lawmakers about, say, the merits of certain idea, how does the threat of potential primaries play into your strategy for executing your vision for the future?
Primaries are an important tool in the toolbox. They're critical not only for building our bloc of socialists in office, this base of organizer-minded legislators who are bought into an inside-outside strategy,
Hmm.
but they're also important for creating shockwaves and sometimes scaring, sometimes encouraging legislators to support progressive and socialist priorities. So that's definitely part of what we're thinking about as we plan for 2026 and beyond. But we really want to have our eyes on the prize with implementing the platform that Zohran has popularized. So I think all of these questions will be filtered through that lens.
Assembly member, are you worried at all about a backlash in Albany in terms of the DSA and pushing its agenda, this idea that oh they're being too aggressive, or oh come into my district and tell me how to do things, or threaten me with a primary? Well, I'll show you and I'll dig in even more. Is that something that you've ever encountered with your colleagues here in Albany? And is it something that you're concerned about at all in the future?
My role as a member of the Socialists in office in Albany is to work with my colleagues consistently, work around our shared legislative priorities. What goes on outside of Albany, I really don't concern myself too much about because it's important for me to maintain positive relationships, working relationships with my colleagues. And we've had some conflicts and we've survived, so it's not big.
What are the conflicts that you would point to?
Oh, past political incidents, and we're still here, still thriving.
But I mean, what comes to mind when you say past political incidents?
Oh, I mean, you'll have to have me on again to talk about that.
Because you don't want to, or nothing comes to mind immediately?
Nothing comes to mind right now, right now. We want to talk about DSA, Grace, and Zohran.
Yeah, yeah, and I guess then I'll ask you the same question, Grace. Do you ever worry about the potential of getting pushback because of the approach, because of the uh, attitudes that people might have fairly or unfairly about the DSA and about the potentials for primaries, that people push back just for the sake of pushing back?
I think there's a lot of perceptions about DSA, right? That we only knock on doors, for example, or that we will primary anyone and just have no real strategy behind it. But I think as we grow and we show that we're serious, I'm hopeful that people understand more like how we're developing and what we're about, and that it is different and it is more open and it is more radical than a lot of groups that we frequently ally ourselves with, but that it's not baseless. It's not devoid of strategy. So there is a tension inherent in working with state legislators and then also primarying their colleagues. It's hard. And it's not something that I think really happens in the modern political sphere, and certainly not in the way that we do it. So there are challenges, but I think that's working through those challenges is honestly what makes DSA really powerful. And to me, the Socialists in Office Committee and how we work through those conflicts, like not everyone right away is interested in a certain primary or wants to do a certain thing. And we talk through it and we strategize together. And then we go to members and we strategize with an even bigger group. And that's really hard to do, but I think also makes the endorsement more meaningful, the campaign stronger, and then eventually the legislative office stronger too.
So in one of my first interviews with Assemblymember Mamdani back in 2021, he made the case that primaries could include against incumbent DSA members like himself if there's an assessment that they're not living up to what they were elected to do. So with that backdrop, which has stuck in my head for the last 4+ years, what are your expectations for a Mamdani mayoral administration? Is there an expectation that he needs to stand firm on everything he campaigned on? Or is there an understanding that with the powers of the mayor being what they are, there has to be some room for compromise?
So this is a question I think not only DSA, but the entirety of the New York left progressive movement is struggling with at this moment. The left is much more comfortable being on the outside of power and critiquing that power
Mm.
from the outside. And we now find ourselves in a very different position and have to have a different strategy, right? Zohran is of DSA, he is of the left. So I don't want to hold Zohran accountable in the way that I might Kathy Hochul, right? Zohran is a member of DSA and is committed to collaborating and communicating with DSA and with the other members of his coalition frequently. We have a little bit of experience with this, right? If a state legislator that's part of SIO does something that feels counter to DSA values or to DSA strategy, we try to work through it in-house, right? We're not jumping right to a primary of them. We don't want to primary our people. That's not a good use of energy. It's probably not
And
strategic
I should point out that the
either.
assembly member is laughing and has her sound mute, so people can't hear that, but she is visibly enjoying this anecdote.
To make a long answer that I'm working through a little bit shorter, the truth is that I don't know, and I don't think any organization really knows what our exact relationship is going to look like with the Mamdani administration because this is a totally new situation for many people. But I am working both internally and externally to have DSA and our broader coalition grow beyond just an organization, an orientation that critiques power and seeks to hold people accountable from the outside into one that wields real power and deals with the contradictions therein very seriously. And that's going to be a hard transition to make, and we're going to make some mistakes, but I think we can do it.
And, to piggyback on what Grace is saying, as an SIO, Socialist office, this idea that there might be a rift between a mayor and DSA, I think really undermines the process that it takes to become endorsed, the process that we have been a part of for at least, 5 years now in the SIO committee. We have had real human moments, but we are not working alone. When I say that we have a crew of 10,000 deep, that's a crew of 10,000 people who are involved in creating this democratic socialist vision for the state of New York and for New York City. And so, again, tears and angry moments, but we get through it.
Well, I only have a couple minutes left, but the last thing I want to ask you about, Grace, is the Working Families Party and New York City DSA's relationship with this third party, which has seen its influence and power wane, I think, over the last decade, in part because of former Governor Cuomo's successful effort in helping peel away some union support. And as you mentioned, DSA is seeing its numbers grow, although it's not the size of the WFP, but some might say maybe it has more fervent supporters. So what is that relationship, and do you feel like the DSA is stepping into maybe some of the space left by the WFP that it maybe used to occupy?
Yeah, First, I guess I'll push back a little bit. I don't think there's a zero sum where as DSA grows, WFP
Oh
shrinks.
yeah, I
A
don't think it's
lot
been a
of
one-to-one. I
oh
don't think it has.
okay.
My apologies if I was conveying that. Yeah.
And a lot of members are members of both, and we welcome that type of dual carding. But our relationship, I think, is in a good place right now. WFP brings things to the table that DSA isn't as good at, right? DSA is very, very good at turning out members, at knocking on doors, at running a very complex and advanced field operation. We're building skills in many other areas too, but WFP has been on the scene much longer. They bring a lot of formal and informal relationships to coalitions that DSA doesn't have access to yet. And they're also, you know, in my opinion, not stingy with that. WFP has a real interest in building a broader left, as does DSA. And I think when we can work together on that, we're at our best. And electorally, we're often endorsing the same candidates.
Yeah.
I think the ideal situation is, right, WFP tends to endorse more people, and DSA is endorsing a subset of those people. Our org goes, I think, a little harder for each individual one, whereas WFP spreads its resources more widely.
Above and beyond, Grace. Above and beyond.
Yes, as Vera said, above and beyond. So I think we're in a good place. I think both organizations are necessary to build on this nascent left labor coalition that we're seeing in New York City and hopefully through New York State. And I'm hopeful that we keep building on that relationship and building that movement together.
Well, we've been speaking with Grace Mauser. She is the co-chair of the New York City DSA, and we've also been hearing from Assemblymember Pharra Soufrant Forrest, a Brooklyn member of the DSA. Thank you both so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, thanks, David. Appreciate it.